So we've just gone through using normal distributions to assign probabilities to given observations with the z-scores, but those normal distributions are useful for a lot more than just z-score calculations, right? They really are the basis for hypothesis testing, which is what we do whenever we're running an inferential test. And the way that inferential tests work is they essentially try to come up with the probability that your null hypothesis is true. So clearly then it's important to know what a null hypothesis is. Okay, the null hypothesis really is the statement of nothing. That's why it's called null, kind of like dull, right? It means that if you're testing for differences, the null is that there are no differences. If you're testing for relationships, it means that there are no relationships. If you're testing for some sort of a linear model, it means there's no linear model that can be constructed, right? So that null is referred to as H sub naught. This is incredibly boring to consider, but it's really important because this is what the p-value is actually reporting. It's the probability that this nothingness is true. But before we start an inferential test, we do also have to know what our actual research hypothesis is, right? What exactly do we expect to see in the data that we're analyzing? And the reason why we need to know this as well as the null is because this is going to tell us whether or not we're asking a two-tailed question or a one-tailed question. So let's just spend a second trying to figure out what exactly we mean by one-tailed and two-tailed. If we're doing a two-tailed test, it means we think there's a difference, like these two means are not equal, or that there's a relationship, but we don't specify exactly the nature of that difference or of that relationship. So in other words, we're not saying that we expect that, population 1 is greater than population 2. We're just saying there's some difference that we would like to explore. But a one-tailed test actually does say, you know what, we really don't care because we don't expect to see a relationship in one direction. We really only expect to see it playing out like this. Okay, and the reason why you might want to be this specific is because really, in a nutshell, it determines the power of your test. Let's talk about that for a second. So when we're conducting a hypothesis test, right, we are calculating some test statistic that we compare to this normal distribution. And where that test statistic falls along this x-axis tells us whether it's likely that we would see that, and therefore there's no significant difference or significant relationship, or if it's highly unlikely that we would see that difference or relationship based on this population. If we're doing a two-tailed test, it means we have to take that 5%. So remember, keep in mind, we typically use 95% confidence threshold, so that 0.05 significance level. Right? So if we're trying to do a two-tailed test, it means we have to split that 5% between both tails of our normal distribution. This is important because if we're saying that we only have a significant result if it falls beyond whatever threshold is set for the 5%, right? If we're splitting that up into two halves, it means that that critical threshold is being pushed out. So what we calculate really has to be super extreme for us to call it significant. That means it's a pretty low-powered test. In contrast, if we're doing a one-tailed test, meaning that we've specified the exact nature of the difference we expect to see, then it means we're really only focused on one side of that distribution, on one tail. And we can have a right-tailed test, which means that we're looking for these positive test statistic results that fall beyond the threshold, or we're doing a left-tailed test, where we're looking for a negative test statistic to fall beyond that threshold. When we're doing this one-tailed test, that whole 5% can be clumped into one tail, whichever tail we're interested in. So what that means is we're able to push back that critical value. So we're more likely to be able to calculate something that falls into this significant zone. If I go back and compare that, right, we were 1.96 was the critical value that we had to beat for the two-tailed test, right? So to call it significant, we had to calculate a test statistic that was more than 1.96. But if we're doing a two-tailed test, we only have to calculate a test statistic that's greater than 1.645 in order to say we have a significant difference. Now the downside of these one-tailed tests is that you really can't make any statements at all in the other direction that you're not considering. So it's not, if there is, there could be a difference in the other direction. You would not see it if you're doing this one-tailed test. You're only going to see significant differences if they occur in the direction that you specified. So for inferential tests, that's what we're doing. with this normal distribution curve, right? We're calculating some test statistic, and then we're comparing it to this distribution to see whether or not it's likely for us to have calculated that value based on the normal population distribution. So knowing what that hypothesis is becomes very important, again, because it determines the power of our test, and the power of our test is really how likely we are to be able to find a significant difference when it truly exists. Okay, so let's talk about significance for a second. Statistically, when we talk about significance, what we're saying is that it's highly unlikely that a result occurred strictly because of random chance, right? That there is something else going on. There's either a true relationship or some true difference between given populations. And we use p-values to assess this, right? So typically we're going to use that 0.05 p-value threshold. If we return a p-value, or we have a probability that's less than 0.05, what that means is there's less than a 5% chance that the result we found was just due to random chance alone. Okay, so this p less than 0.05, or this less than 5% chance that it was just random variability, means we have a significant result. And if we have a significant result, it means we reject the null hypothesis. Remember, the null was that there was nothing interesting, no difference, no relationships, right? If, on the other hand, we come up with a p-value that's greater than 0.05, that means there's more than a 5% chance that whatever result we got happened just because of random variability, just because of chance alone. Okay, this is not a significant result, and therefore we have to accept the null hypothesis that it's likely there really is no relationship or no difference. Okay, so this 0.05 again can vary depending on your test and the power of your test, but it is a pretty standard threshold, and we're basically using that threshold to figure out, well, is it likely or unlikely that the result I have occurred just because of chance? Another way of thinking about significance is it's setting the degree of risk you're willing to take that you're going to say there's a significant result when really there isn't, right? So that would be that you reject a null hypothesis when actually it's true. Because even if you're using that 0.05% threshold, right, that 0.05 p-value, it means that there's still a 5% chance that even though you're saying there's something significant going on, there really isn't. Right? So it's risk. It's really about risk. What's the degree of risk you're willing to take that you're going to say there's a significant result when in fact there isn't? One thing that statistical significance does not mean is that the result is particularly meaningful, right? And again, this comes back to the power of your test. You might have a really powerful test, a lot of observations, and your design is perfect. You've controlled for all these other variables, and you may find a significant result, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's ecologically meaningful. Right? And so there are additional tests that will usually follow beyond the p-value to try to assess how meaningful a result is. So again, we're going to be using this normal probability distribution to determine that p-value, right? The probability that our result occurred just because of chance alone. Right? And this p-value is really testing our null hypothesis, telling you the probability that your null hypothesis is true. In any p-value, any probability greater than 0.05, we're conservative, right? We don't want to say there's significance unless we're really pretty confident it is. So if we come up with a p-value greater than 0.05, we're just going to accept that that null hypothesis is true. So considering that p-value, right, that significance threshold, can be interpreted as the degree of risk you're willing to take that you're going to say there's a significant result when they're not, that gets us into thinking about error, right? There always is a chance that we are going to make a mistake. Statistics is not black and white. It's not just a 100% answer and you know that's the truth. There's always the possibility that you're wrong. And you can be wrong in a couple of different ways. So when you say that there is a significant result, but there really isn't, that's a type 1 error. And this is pretty much the worst thing you can do as a statistician. Think about this as crying wolf. We want to be conservative. The last thing we want to do is say that there's something happening when really there might not be. You limit your chance of making that type of error by setting that p-value threshold, right? That threshold tells you the probability that you would make a type 1 error. Right? So if we set our p-value threshold at 0.05, it means that we have about a 5% chance that we will make a type 1 error. Right? If we set our p-value at 0.01, right, that's even better in terms of making a type 1 error. Right? We're less likely to make a type 1 error, only 1% chance. Okay, but we're also then potentially making a different type of error. and that's the type 2 error. So type 2 error is when you accept a null hypothesis and you say there isn't a real relationship or a real difference, but there actually is, and you've missed it, right? So you've missed what was interesting that was happening in your data. So the lower you bring that p-value, it's true you're less likely to make a type 1 error, but you're more likely to make a type 2 error and miss something that's really going on. This is referred to as the power of your test, your ability to find and report a significant result when it truly is a significant result. Let's think a little bit more about that relationship between the type 1 and the type 2 errors, right? So this is essentially the relationship between the two. Here's your probability of a type 1 error, right? This is your p-value threshold that controls this. And here's the probability of your type 2 error. This is the power of your test. So if you had a p-value threshold of 1, right, you would never make a type 2 error, right? That type 2 error rate is at 0. It's because you'd call everything you possibly could calculate significant. But as you lower that p-value threshold so that your probability of making a type 1 error is lower, you end up seeing the probability of a type 2 error skyrocket exponentially, right? So lowering this is good to reduce our chance of making a type 1 error, but it increases our chance of making a type 2 error. So what's interesting is that these two error rates are inversely related. They're tied to each other. So as you change one, you're automatically going to change the other. But luckily, statistically, and in our design of experiments, there are other things that we can adjust to make sure that we can reduce our chance of a type 2 error, right, while still maintaining a given threshold for a type 1 error, a given probability threshold. And the primary one that we have the most control over is the sample size. So the smaller your sample size, right, the more likely you are to miss true significance. You just don't have enough observations to really capture that population and to make any statements about it with much confidence, right? So if you increase your sample size, you're going to increase your power, right, which reduces the risk of a type 2 error without having to adjust this p-value threshold at all. The other things that are going to impact the power of your test are things like just the inherent variability in the sample, in the data you've collected. If you have data that's highly variable, that's going to reduce your power and increase your chance of a type 2 error, right? It's just more variable. It's going to be harder to characterize that. Similarly, the effect size. So how big is the difference that you're looking for? Or how strong is the relationship that you're looking for? Right? The larger that effect size, the more likely you are to see it. It's practically screaming in your face, it's so big. It's not going to be hard to see that, and that increases our power as well. And then again, this last one, this level of significance, that if we alter that, that's directly going to change our power of our test automatically. So really, these two are the ones that are associated with the population inherently. We don't have a lot of control about that. We can control this, but if we reduce our chance of type 1, we're increasing our chance of type 2. So we try not to play with those. And then really it all comes down to our sample size. If we can increase our sample size to up our power, we just do that. If we can't, and we know we have to stick with that smaller sample size, that's when we might have to adjust our level of significance. The other piece, just to think about significance, is that just because we have a significant result does not mean that we have a meaningful result, right? It doesn't really mean anything other than we had less than a, whatever our threshold was, let's say 0.05, we had less than a 5% chance of making a type 1 error. That's really all that we're saying. There is still a possibility that we'll be wrong even when we conclude that a result is significant or not significant. And that's why the interpretation and knowing what the actual p-values were from a test becomes so important, right? When we went through all of those different questions you should ask when evaluating statistics that are presented to you, this is what we're getting at, right? Was the study designed in such a way and conducted in such a way that we really can put some faith in those conclusions of significant or not significant? Right? And then we'll also need to be thinking about, well, so what if we have a significant result, or so what if we don't? Still, do we see something that's ecologically meaningful? Think about doing that own assessment for statistical spin on your own work as you're going through these analyses and as you're writing up your discussions. So hopefully this has been a really quick introduction to understanding how probabilities are used to determine significance, what that significance means, and how the power of our analyses relates to that significance level, right? How those type 1 and type 2 errors are related. We will be jumping right into applying all of this in our first inferential test starting next week.